Most people think delivery driving is just another job, simple, routine, and safe. But out here, when the streets go quiet, the real horror begins. Strange customers, eerie locations, encounters that will haunt you long after the shift ends. Not every tip is worth the trip, and not every delivery ends with a safe return. Real stories, real terror. Your next delivery might be your last. Subscribe now, if you dare. Today, I was driving for Uber Eats near TCU. I was picking up an order on Green Avenue by the university. Since I couldn't find a spot on the street, I quickly pulled into a parking garage. As I was power walking to the pickup, a guy stopped and rolled his window down. He told me he had followed me there. He was completely belligerent and intoxicated. "Yeah, that's right, run away," he slurred. I stepped forward and asked, "What?" "What do you mean?" "You're driving like a complete jerk," he snapped. I had actually been driving very slowly and carefully because I'd been having terrible luck with my tires. I'd had 3 flats this month. One was caused by a barbed piece of metal sticking out of a parking lot in a bad area. Another happened when I hit a pothole. And the most recent? That was only 2 nights ago. My ex punctured it because she was angry about our breakup. I had just replaced that tire the night before, and at this point, I was nearly broke. That's why I was working late, trying to catch up on payments for all these tires. So I assumed this guy was mad that I had been driving too slow or something. I couldn't be sure, though, because he wasn't making any sense. I tried to explain, "I'm making Uber deliveries." "Sorry, I'm at work right now." He then said, Yeah, I don't care. I know you're making deliveries. You, beanie-wearing guy." I was wearing a beanie because it was cold that night. A passerby, just as confused as I was, glanced over. I turned to them and said, "This guy's drunk." I tried to ignore him and told him, "Have a good night." It seemed like he was driving away, so I waved goodbye and walked into the store to grab the order. I quickly picked it up and rushed back to my car. But as I approached, I saw his vehicle pulled up right behind mine. That's when I knew something was wrong. I immediately pulled out my phone and tried to take a picture of his license plate, but he didn't have one on the front, only on the back. He was driving a brand new Range Rover, much sportier than the older models. He was well dressed, and from what I could tell, he was a white, bearded man in his mid-40s. Before I could get a clear photo of his plate number, he sped away. But I knew the parking garage had cameras, though he had only pulled in halfway. This happened tonight around 6 to 6:30 p.m., after the Grand Plaza had already closed, so I haven't been able to find out if his plates were caught on camera. When I got into my car, I realized he had stabbed a hole in my tire, the same tire I had just replaced the night before. I couldn't believe it. I still don't understand why someone who seemingly had so much would feel the need to take from someone driving an old 2005 Toyota Corolla, barely making ends meet. Uber towed me to my mechanic, and he said he had a spare, but still, be careful out there, everyone. One night, I was serving a customer when, out of nowhere, a woman bursts into the store, shouting unintelligible nonsense. She literally tries to dive over the counter, but misjudges it, slamming into it instead. The impact winds her, and her can of cider flies forward, spilling all over me. So now I'm thinking, great, 20 minutes to closing, and I get a drunk junkie flying at me. She starts screaming that I have to help her. They're after her. I dismiss it at first because she looks like a junkie. Scraggy hair, missing teeth. But she's not homeless. Her clothing is decent, which makes the situation seem a bit off. I try to calm her down, giving an apologetic look to the other customer, who is now backed into the farthest corner away from the scene. But the woman keeps repeating over and over that the men are coming. By this point, I've moved to the reception area, trying to usher her out of the store, but she grabs onto me, pleading for me to call the police. I tell her that the local police station is literally 2 streets away, but she begs me to take her there myself. Now I'm just getting frustrated, thinking, man, I gotta get her out of the store. But then, as she realizes I'm not going to help her, she suddenly stops, just goes completely still. The screaming, the begging, it all just shuts off. She stares at the floor in horror, like she's given up on everything. Slowly, she walks to the door, turns her head back to me, and softly says, "I'm sorry." Then she bolts, runs straight out the door and into the street. I step outside to see where she's going, and she fucking runs into oncoming traffic, stopping about 5 cars. A bunch of people rush in, trying to restrain her at the side of the road. A guy passing by tells me she had been running around further down the street, frantically trying to get help from strangers. Another day, another junkie, I think. The police arrive, collect her, and I start heading back inside. But as I turn, something catches my eye. A car parked across the road outside my store. A black SUV. Inside are 2 men in suits, wearing sunglasses. This is at 11:45 p.m., mind you, and, clear as day, a cord running from their ears. Now bear in mind, this is the UK, and they're dressed like American TV show feds. They don't move. They just sit there, staring at me, until I get back inside. That night, after closing, I arranged for a friend to pick me up, because, despite my rationale telling me it was all just coincidence, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The SUV was still there when I left, and sure enough, they tailed us. For 2 miles. Only when they hit a red light and we got through, did they finally disappear. I've never been so thoroughly spooked by a 10-minute incident. It made me wonder if that woman was a junkie at all. Just weird.
Make sure to like and subscribe. If you have any stories you would like to share with us, our email is in the description. Let's continue.
2 stories stand out in my mind. I should note that I worked the day shift. These happened in broad daylight. One time, I took a delivery to a nice big house in a nice neighborhood. An older gentleman, probably in his 50s or 60s, answered the door and invited me in, while he went to grab his wallet. Normally I would decline, but the house was impressive enough from the outside that I wanted to check out what the inside looked like. So I followed him to his back porch, but stopped dead in my tracks when I noticed the large screen TV on the porch blasting porn. When he noticed I had stopped, he beckoned me to come out onto the porch. Naturally, I declined, got the money, and left. The other story happened at an extended stay hotel with a bad reputation. Most instances of drivers being robbed happen there. I got to the outer door and had some issues with the code when a guy stuck his head out the window, said the pizza was for him, and that he'd be right down. I eventually remembered the code, went inside, and met the guy right as he got off the elevator, rather than simply exchanging the money and leaving as you might expect. The guy told me he didn't have the money. Some other guy back in the room had it, and asked me to come upstairs with him. With the first red flag tingling in the back of my head, I stepped into the elevator with him. When the doors closed, he said something to the effect of, "Hey, check this out," and began to lift his shirt. Second and third red flags here. Under his shirt, he had bandages wrapped around his stomach. I'll spare you the graphic details, but it was clearly a bad wound. A stab wound, if I had to guess. He proceeded to confirm that he had, in fact, been stabbed the other night, that it was on the news. Didn't I see it? And after a pause in the conversation, that it hurt a lot. We stepped off the elevator, got to his room, and he popped inside before coming back out to ask me to come in because the guy with the money was on the couch. At this point, 2 thoughts went through my mind. Either this was the dumbest setup for a robbery I'd ever seen, or the couch guy was really, really lazy. I eventually settled on the fact that if this were a robbery, The guy probably wouldn't have advertised his gaping stab wound, and I kind of wanted to meet the laziest man in the world. So, I stepped inside, careful not to let Stabby get behind me. Inside, there was an older white-haired man on the couch and a young, tweaked-out girl. The man handed the money to the girl, and naturally, it was a $100 bill, the only cash he had. So, reluctantly, I made change for him out of my own money, concluded the transaction, and hastily retreated from what I could only assume was a dealer's den.
Thanks for tuning in. Watch another video if you dare.